Hi everyone, my name is Albert Muskies, although you may know me by my internet name, Edgyalbert. I have a TikTok, which is maybe someplace you've seen me before, and people have been asking me to make a YouTube channel, and I don't watch YouTube. I don't know what happens there. I don't want to know what happens there. But I figured since I can't really outline, and I wanted to outline you guys something smart and thoughtful, since I can't really outline, I thought we'd do kind of an off-the-dome kind of sesh here. I recently had a friend of mine who asked me what makes a good boot, what separates a good boot from a bad boot. And despite the fact that we're heading into spring and summer, I thought that was a good question to answer. I thought we could do kind of a nice long ramble here about shoes and boots and fashion history, and I don't really know how to make a YouTube video or what people do on here, but I'll try and edit something that is coherent, and we'll you guys will watch it and subscribe and make me very rich, and I'll get better lights and a better apartment and a better setup and a nicer camera, and then we'll be off to the races. You can basically separate boots into two pretty broad categories that we'll be talking about here. We'll be talking about boots that are sewn, that are stitched, and boots that are glued. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about how boots are attached to the sole they're on. And if there's any confusion about what that means, let's just start at the beginning here. There are essentially two main parts of a boot, right? The upper, which is the leather part, and the sole, which is the part on the bottom. It's usually rubber. See here, and if we're going to get more technical here, this has a rubber outsole. So the outsole is the part that touches the ground. The midsole, sorry, my hand here, is the part in the middle, and that's what a stitched shoe is stitched to. And for much of human history, that's how all shoes were made. Until the early 1900s, we didn't have a way to turn rubber into something that we could really use. Rubber has been used by humanity for a long time. Like the Aztec or the Mesoamerican ball game, if you're familiar, used a rubber ball, but it was just a solid hunk of rubber. It wasn't like rubber balls today or a basketball or something that has air inside. It was solid rubber. So it took a long time before vulcanization, which was created by Goodyear. I think Charles Goodyear is his name. The blimp. Are you familiar with the Goodyear blimp? He came up with. And another man, as with any invention, there were different people coming up with something like this at the same time. But vulcanization was created, which was the process that could make rubber more malleable, and you could use it to make hoses. You could use it to make whatever. And the really big innovation there, or tires was another huge one, but that ended up making it a lot easier to wear shoes, and you were able to get rubber outsoles. So that meant that before sneakers were invented, pretty much everyone was wearing leather shoes and boots. It was just the most sensible thing. Before there was plastic, before there was rubber, leather is essentially skin, right? It's hide from an animal that's been treated. And it's a natural thing, so it has properties that allow it to mold to your foot. A lot of boots still use a leather insole, so that's the part that your foot goes on, and that kind of molds to your arch. A lot of people aren't used to that anymore because, we have these very comfy sneakers that immediately are comfortable. Boots and shoes are typically not that way. You gotta work them in a little bit, and then they conform to your foot. A leather shoe or boot could theoretically last you forever. The upper, that part on the top, is the only real vulnerable part here because it's leather, but as long as you moisturize it and you clean it, it could theoretically last you forever. The part that breaks down is the sole. And this is the big difference here. We talked about glued footwear, we talked about stitched footwear. Glued footwear, and I'll show you an example here, this pair of Blundstones, the upper is not sewn to the sole. They do something much cheaper, which was a process that was pioneered by the makers of Timberlands, I believe. And it's injected with a glue and just glued to the sole here. These are surprisingly sturdy boots that have lasted me 5 years. But if for some reason I broke through the sole, or the sole came undone, which is undoubtedly going to happen, this whole shoe is done. That's like $200 down the drain, right? That's done. The big difference with a stitch boot is that when the sole gives out, because it's stitched, I can take this to a cobbler, very old-fashioned, and they can remove that and attach a new sole. So that's the broad difference between these two categories of footwear. Are glued shoes and boots always bad? Not necessarily, but you have to be prepared for them to give out on you, like a sneaker. Because when a sneaker, I'm sure you know this from, we've all had a favorite pair of sneakers that have like come apart. Once they come apart, you can glue them back together, but that's not going to hold. And with leather footwear, you at least have a chance, at least stitched leather footwear, you have a chance to keep it going. So these are Goodyear welted, which, you know, that's the most common kind of welting, which is a stitch. And it makes it waterproof. It seals it to the sole. But there are a lot of stitched boots that are out there that are bad. And how do you know a bad boot? I mean, it's a little bit like the Supreme Court definition of pornography, right? Like, you know it when you see it. You ought to be able to know a bad boot from a good boot just by looking at it. It doesn't usually take very long at all. What are the factors? But it is hard to articulate exactly what makes a bad boot a bad boot. For me, I can normally tell just by the way the leather looks is usually a big sign. If it looks kind of shiny or plasticky. And also, and I'll put up a picture of it, there's a way that kind of all cheap boots kind of look. And it's kind of, I'm not going to say that a dainty boot is necessarily bad, but a part of the reason you're buying a boot is that it's going to hold up for at least a large portion of your lifetime. I don't really see the point in buying a boot that isn't going to last you. And I think the whole reason these cheap boots exist is that it is hard to find good boots. And good boots are always expensive. Always, always expensive. And these brands exist to trick you. And this has happened to so many of my friends. And the friend who asked me what separates a good boot from a bad boot really stands by boots I consider to be bad boots. There's not a lot you can do. And this is kind of the issue with fashion in general, is there's always going to be a cheaper alternative to the thing you want. And it takes time with boots. You know, they're going to put inferior materials inside there to make them feel comfier from the jump, but that doesn't make them a better boot. Very expensive boots in general will have less of a break-in if they're not like a work boot. My Lucchese Bart boots, my Our Legacy Camion boots, those almost had no break-in. The Camions had a little bit. The shaft would kind of crease in and rub my ankle, which hurt for a minute, but that's since been broken in. So that's part of it. If you buy a super expensive boot, there's not going to be a whole lot of break-in if it's more of a dressy boot, more of a fashion boot. But like these boots, this is the black Klondike Red Wing boot. It was a Japan exclusive for a while. I liked it because it had the soft toe here. And you're going to say, like, this makes it a little daintier. But I liked it. A lot of Red Wing boots have a very bulbous toe. And I thought this was kind of cool that it had, like, a dress boot toe. Now, at this point in my life, I'm like, how did I fit my toes in there? Look how fucking narrow it is. What was the point of that, Albert? Well, the point of that was these were like 300 some bucks. I got them for 75 because I knew a guy at Red Wing. But and these are a real beast to break in. Red Wings are very good, but they just are bare to break in. And that usually speaks to something good about the product. I mean, there's an easier way too, but if a boot feels too easy, it's probably not a good boot. There has to be some effort, you know? There has to be something. And that's the beautiful thing about this shit. Like, if you see a guy walking around with a totally thrashed pair of these, you know that that guy got some blisters off that shit. And that's what matters to me in fashion. You know, it's like, and a lot of people don't like this or get this, but there's no clickbaity instant way to get the look. You know, I can't snap with my fucking thing. There's no clickbaity way to hop in and get the look. You gotta kind of work for that shit. And that's cool to me. That it requires intentionality. It requires research. It requires labor on your part. There may be some blood involved. And the most interesting pieces of clothing that, for me personally, are the ones that require work. They don't come ready to go. That's why I like raw denim or all denim. That's why I like work pants. Like, they're technically finished when they leave the factory, but it's going to take you months, maybe years, to really give that piece the potential it deserves. So, this is just me rambling here. In terms of boots, specifically, you have to resist the temptation. You have to resist the temptation to pick up the lesser pair. Lesser pairs, I would also include Dr. Martens in there. They do have some made in England shoes, but by and large, their shoes are of the glued variety now. So I brought a pair of Boots here to show you. Boot is a French shoe brand. It is one of the best shoe companies, in my experience, that exists. And they're not cheap. I really had to save up for these. I've also had these for like 7 years, and they are looking great. And that's the thing about you invest and you have this shit for fucking life. But you see they have this stitching here down the side. And if you're familiar with Doc Martens, you might say, oh, that's the Doc Martens stitch. But the crazy thing about Doc Martens is they're copying a stitch that you would need on a real pair of stitched shoes, and then there's gluing it down. So on a pair of Doc Martens, this stitch that on like a nice pair of shoes or boots serves a function does not. Dr. Martens outsourced all their labor from their original factory in England, in Northamptonshire, and they moved all their production abroad. They are not really open about discussing where their factories are. They don't really talk about what leathers are being used in their shoes anymore. And actually, the brand was given new life because the factory that they used to work out of, the workers bought it. Former Doc Martens workers bought it, and they make their own shoes now called Solivare, which we sell in the Heddle shop, and I have a few pairs. They're really good shoes. So, different kind of welt. This is called a Norwegian welt. It's kind of hard to see, but there's like a lot going on that's super hefty. Just a juicy shoe, and that's a great sole. Paraboot's very rare because most shoe companies don't make their own soles. They usually buy Vibram soles. Vibram is a company that was founded by an Italian hiker, and he had a friend who died in a hiking accident, and he was inspired by tank treads, and he made those hefty leather soles. Vibram soles are very good. It's just that most brands don't have the resources to make their own soles, and that's something really special about this. Paraboot is so good. I got a few more pairs, but it's just, you just know. And I think that like cheap boots and shoes are typically kind of cowardly, I would say, in terms of silhouette. Like, this is a kind of interesting looking shoe. It has like a mock toe, sort of. It's got that, it's like a lot of things at the same time, right? It's a Doc Marten, it's a dress shoe, it's a boot, all at the same. It's like, it's doing so many crazy things. So the way I've discovered Paraboot, and I love how that stitch goes, it's just so funky. The way I discovered Paraboot was I was studying abroad in Paris, and I was living there and working there and studying, and was seeing these old dudes on the subway wearing these shoes. And I just thought they were so cool. And I didn't know anything about them. So little did I know, but at that time, this is like 2015 for context. In 2015, Paraboot was getting like hip in Japan for I don't know, the first time there was a wave of para boot getting hip, and it started happening in Japan. And I looked really closely, and para boot is one of those old-fashioned companies that I love, where their website isn't super cool, their flagship stores are not super cool, they're just old school. You know, this brand has existed for forever. And so kind of like Pendleton or any kind of heritage American brand that like old people like. So I went to the store. It was not very cool. It was not very hip. And I ended up buying a pair of those. Those are the Chambord. So I'll write that above. Para boot Chambord. And yeah, it was just a very beautiful moment of like finding something in real life, encountering something in real life. And I encourage you that when next time you travel, you try and keep your eyes on what people are wearing, because that still happens somehow in this age of the internet. Now para boot is all over the place. It's in a lot of English and American retailers, and it's a little easier to come by. Still, and it's unfortunately become more expensive also, but it's still made in France. The quality is excellent. They are not the most comfortable shoes, but they are really good at what they're for. Like, you could be walking on them all day in the rain or whatever, and like your dogs might be barking at the end of the day, but like no lasting damage. They really protect your feet and do what they're meant to do. And they really like conform to your foot. They really change. And I've had those for 7 years. I think that's one of the pieces that I've owned the longest and worn that whole time. So, and that's the thing. Those are like, I don't know what I got them for, $350 maybe, which was a lot for me at the time. But then if you think about it, and I've worn them for 7 years, how many pairs of sneakers have you blown out in that time that you bought for like $90 or $80? And it's like, that shit's long gone. It's in the landfill, which is fucked up on its own right. Not on you, but just on the way that things are. Sneakers are undoubtedly comfortable. And the older I get, I'm 26, the older I get, the more I can appreciate a comfortable sneaker. When I was in my early 20s, I did not see that. Now I'm in my latter 20s. And the lattermost part of my 20s, I am getting into it. You may know that I love a pair of New Balances. These are not the fancy made in USA ones, but the 574s. I never thought I would wear a shoe that looked like this. I thought it was so dorky. And then now, here I am, eating my words. You know, there's got to be, in life, there must be balance. You know, you can have a pair of beautiful, uncomfortable, hard to wear boots that last you and you wear in the snow and the sleet and the rain and whatever. But you're also going to need some comfy ones just for like walking to get a coffee in the morning. I was super manic about getting the wear in on my boots and my jeans, and like I would just like, I wouldn't wear sweatpants, you know, I would never relax, I wouldn't walk anywhere in a comfy shoe. I was so rabid about getting the wear in, and like that, and that's kind of whack too, because it's like, that's not genuine, you know, that's not how that shit really happens. You know, like sitting in your office chair being uncomfortable in crunchy jeans is not how you get the sick fades. You gotta like take them on a trip. You gotta travel the world, or you gotta go on a hike, or you gotta do something engaging and interesting. So yeah. So I would say you want to look out for bad construction. If it's that kind of like 6-inch work boot lace-up style, I would caution you against a glued down boot. I hate, guys, I hate when a lace-up boot has a zipper. Like, it's designed to look like a lace-up boot, but it zips down the side. It's fine if it doesn't have laces and it zips. That's okay. It's like a pull-on boot, or like a kind of like Chelsea or boot style, or like that Our Legacy boot style. But I swear, like, why? The redundancy of that is so objectionable to me. It's disgusting. It's a crime. And don't ever do that. That's like wearing a jacket, or like a sweater, some shit they'd sell these in like Target or H&M, whatever, that has big buttons but also has a zipper. It's like, why are we doing this? Why the fuck are we doing this? It's redundant. No redundant details on your boots. So yeah, redundant details, bad pointy little toe. I would also caution you against the school of shoes that I call like the fairy prince shoes. These were really big kind of, I don't know, 5 years ago. I feel like a lot of times when a man is wearing a dress shoe on reality TV, it's this kind of long, pointy deal. You see them a lot in reality TV. And I think they're like a weird offshoot of like cheap dress shoes. Like I remember I would go to temple, but you might go to church and I'd have to wear these like ugly, ugly dress shoes that were uncomfortable. And, you know, I think a lot of people's bias against leather footwear is that. And against all like tailored clothing too, against blazers or ties or whatever. It's like you had to wear them in this really formal setting that was not very fun for you. And yeah. So, and that's the other thing, right? Those shoes were uncomfortable because they were badly constructed. A good leather is going to be tough at first, but it's going to mold to your foot and it's going to get a lot more comfortable to wear. So keep an eye on all those things and just like look for cool shit. Like, or try and like, if a boot company isn't very transparent about like where their leather comes from or how it's made or if it can be resold, you should avoid it, because when you're spending that much money, and you should be spending money on boots, unfortunately that's the only way, you're kind of buying into the brand, and you want to know that you're with a brand that like has good values and will honor their whatever their policies may be, or will be able to assist you in a resole if you need one. So some great legendary shoe and boot brands, Alden is super old. Indiana Jones, that's his boot of choice, the Indy boot. They make incredible loafers. That's expensive. I don't own that. Viberg is very famous, made in Canada. Their stuff teeters on that kind of fancy little pointy shoe style that I discuss, but hey, that shit's really well made. And it's that unstructured toe that's kind of cool in some cases. Red Wing, obviously, very good, kind of more entry level. Solivare, pretty affordable for what it is, and a great way to do the Doc Martens style without like supporting Doc Martens, which I would advise. Because let's not support brands that fire everyone who works for them in their home country and just ships their labor off to somewhere they can exploit people without, consequence. That's bad. In terms of loafers, Blackstock and Weber is really exciting. Their stuff is very cool. I have a pair of those, the 316 collab ones. The Padmore and Barnes, which is the original Clarks, they are a different kind of stitch footwear. It's not as like hardcore, but it is a kind of stitch footwear, and it's usually very comfy. Paraboot, obviously. Paraboot is so great. Yeah, I just couldn't sing their praises more highly. And if you want a cheaper version of Paraboot, that is a glued shoe, keep in mind. So like it's a little bit teetering on the edge of not being worth the money. It's that riding that fine line is Kleeman. I have a pair of their Kleeman Padror shoes, which are kind of a rip of the Paraboot Michael or Michel. So those are all options, but I just feel like you know it when you see it. You know a good boot. You know a bad boot. I mean, and this is just part of like becoming someone who's like well acquainted with fashion. It's like you just get to sense when things are good or bad, when something is old and real or when it's new and fake. This is something you just have to get used to. You can always buy boots used for cheaper on eBay or whatever, but I just would caution you against that, because part of the fun of having a new pair of boots is it conforming to your foot and becoming something you want to wear every day. And that's special. That's just what it is. So guys, like and subscribe. This is my first. We'll dial in the formula with time. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you a little bit of time to just kick it and learn some stuff. And feel free to cruise over to the Heddle shop if you want to buy a pair of Solivairs. I'm sure we have a few in stock still. Yeah, and have a great day. Happy hunting out there, folks. And I have a fashion history podcast in the works. Follow me on all platforms under Edgyalbert. And yeah, stay in touch.